What if I told you that every attorney who's represented Richard Allen has publicly maintained that he is innocent? What if I told you that multiple individuals submitted sworn statements alleging mistreatment and abuse of Richard Allen while he was housed at Westville Correctional Facility? What if I told you Richard Allen spent more than a year in prison-like isolation before his trial, and that serious questions were raised about his treatment and mental condition during that time? What if I told you the prosecution's case did not include a witness who unequivocally identified Richard Allen as the man seen in the infamous Bridge Guy video? What if I told you that no precise medical time of death was ever established, yet a very specific timeline became central to the state's theory? What if I told you the crime scene contained intentionally staged elements that investigators, prosecutors, and defense attorneys would spend years arguing about? What if I told you that former prosecutor Robert Ives initially believed the Delphi murders would be solved within days based on what investigators found at the crime scene? And if Robert Ives thought the case would be solved in days, why did it take investigators 5 years and 8 months to make an arrest? What if I told you multiple alternate suspects were investigated? What if I told you that defense filings later alleged that other individuals made statements interpreted as confessions to the crime? What if I told you that for years, investigators pursued online grooming and catfishing leads, yet the man ultimately convicted was never shown to have had prior contact with either victim? What if I told you investigators lost approximately 70 days of recorded interviews and investigative material during the most critical phase of the case? What if I told you that same man, Richard Allen, spoke with law enforcement within days of the murders? What if I told you it took 5 years and 8 months to arrest the man ultimately convicted of murdering 2 teenage girls in Delphi, Indiana? And what if I told you that after thousands of pages of documents, years of investigation, countless hearings, and one of the most controversial murder trials in modern Indiana history, many of these questions remain fiercely debated to this day? Aimee, when did you first realize this wasn't a normal murder investigation?
During the pretrial hearings. Those questions that you just raised is exactly why I'm here. Every single one of those questions have left all of us in the community that follow the Delphi case up in arms, wanting answers. They were left unanswered. We were strung along for 5 years and 8 months about what this crime was about, the possibility of numerous people being involved. And then when we got to trial, we were expected to forget all of the innuendos, all of the reported statements by law enforcement, all of the details of the crime scene. We were told, forget that. Now we're taking a third turn, because in 2019, we were told law enforcement was taking a new direction. When we got to trial, they took ultimately a third direction. And that was a lone wolf scenario with a man who had absolutely no criminal history, no digital forensic evidence that he was involved in any type of online nefarious involvement. He had no connection to the girls, and we have all been left with our heads being scratched, going, what is happening in our justice system? That is why when the trial started, well, prior to the trial starting, during the pretrial hearings and following wrongful convictions and following numerous cases, there started to be a pattern of bias rulings by the judge. Judge Gall was put in place as a special appointment, and everybody was anticipating that she was going to be the right person for the job. But ultimately, it turned out that she had an axe to grind with the defense, and she made that very apparent. By the time we got to trial, I said, with all of the third-party suspects being denied, with the treatment of the defense team, her kicking them off the case, them having to go to the Indiana Supreme Court to prove them having the right to defend a client who is telling the court, these are my attorneys, this is who I want to represent me. And I don't know if we can ever find in any precedents that the Indiana Supreme Court, within an hour of hearing oral arguments, made a ruling. And in this case, within an hour, the Indiana Supreme Court turned around and said, these two attorneys are going to be reassigned as the lawyers for Rick Allen. That's unprecedented. But it just goes to prove the bias that Judge Gall had. And where it came from, I can't explain. I don't know. The bitter taste that she had in her mouth for Andrew Baldwin and Brad Rosie ultimately leaves me questioning, does she really have a scale of balance in her bones as being a judge and the gatekeeper of facts? But the way this trial was handled, the way the evidence was presented, I have always said, you don't need to lie, erase, delete, hide, or do unethical maneuvers to prove a guilty man is guilty. And all of those things were done in this case. This was not a fair trial. I don't care what side of the fence you fall on. Rick Allen is innocent or Rick Allen is guilty. The fact that the man, they ran roughshod over his civil rights is the problem, first and foremost. From there, give us a fair trial, lay all the cards on the table, present all the evidence, allow all the third-party suspect information to come in, then let the chips fall where they may. That's where I stand in this matter when it comes to Delphi.
This bias that you speak of from Judge Fran Gohl, was she showing signs of this bias before the crime photos were leaked, or did she hold that as a grudge against Baldwin and Rosie specifically?
It depends on what side of the fence that you fall on. As a judge, when a motion is filed, typically, and not in every single. I mean, this is a huge case, so some things go without saying. Not every single motion requires a judge to respond with factual law regarding her decision. In this case, 98% of the motions filed in this case, she ruled upon with no precedence, no factual finding, with her denial or her conviction of whatever the brief that was filed. It seemed to be from the very beginning that Rick Allen was the pig pen. Some people, it doesn't take much for someone to look at someone who's being accused of such a horrific crime. And these two little girls, 13, 14 years old, innocent little girls out doing little girl things. Of course, you want to find the perpetrator. Of course, if someone presents you with a suspect, you are going to hopefully find answers and get the conviction that you want. But a judge is supposed to be the gatekeeper of facts. They're not supposed to be the one who's deciding innocent or guilt. They're there to make sure that the case is handled evenly between the defense team and the prosecutor. And it was prevalent very early on. And that started really before Judge Gall was assigned to this case. This started right back from the very beginning when Rick Allen was arrested. And he was booked into a county jail under a fictitious name. His attorney was denied initial access to him. There was a safekeeping order and a hearing that took place where Rick Allen's attorney wasn't present. And within a matter of 3 days of Rick Allen being arrested, he was signed, sealed, and convicted of this crime and sent off to Westville Prison, where he was put in solitary confinement, yanked out of society. Everything that he knew as a human being was lost. His family, his home, his job, all of it just ripped right out of the universe. And he's thrown into an isolation cell at Westville, continuously badgered by the inmates in that unit. The suicide companions who sat outside of his door were encouraged to antagonize and belittle and berate and threaten. And then he starts to begin to be interjected with psychotic, anti-hallucinative drugs. That started from the very beginning of his arrest. Judge Diener signed that safekeeping order, and then he bowed out gracefully, claiming that this case was basically too much for him to handle. And there it went. It spiraled out of control from there. And the defense team on the onset, instead of focusing or being able to focus on their client, the charges against him, they spent the first 4 to 5 months of this case fighting the simple fact that he was put in a maximum security prison, technically as an innocent man, innocent until proven guilty. They spent that time trying to prove that he had no business being incarcerated in a maximum security prison without a trial, that the treatment that he was getting was inhumane. He was being video recorded 24 hours a day. And ultimately, what we end up with is 50% of the state's case came after Rick Allen's arrest. They based half their case at trial on what they pretended they didn't put Rick Allen through. The mental abuse, the physical abuse, the isolation, the threats, him feeling intimidated, him being afraid for not only his life, but his family's life, the drugs they were injecting into him. It's the fruit of the poisonous tree. Once he was there at Westville, they had him in their grip. His phone calls were monitored. His tablet was monitored. Every move he made was monitored. He would go in to visit with his attorneys. They would turn his chair a certain way, make it face the window while prison guards were standing at attention with the video camera, pointing directly at his face as if they could read his lips to where he did not feel comfortable speaking. All of that came after the fact. That's not how our justice system is supposed to work.
Yeah, so let me ask you questions about that. It's my understanding, based on some of what I read about this case, I think it's generally looked at that 30 days, give or take a few, of solitary confinement, what inmates call going to the hole, in the hole, quote unquote, solitary confinement conditions. 30 days is considered like a very thin line between okay and being considered torturous conditions. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely accurate. And if I can just bolden the print, underline it, and exclamation point it, Rick Allen was in solitary confinement for 13 months.
And this is pre-trial. This is after arrest, but pre-trial, 13 months.
Pre-trial.
Pre-trial is, that's a crazy thing too. That's very uncommon, is it not?
It's unheard of.
Wow. So it is that bad. Okay. Well,
it is that bad. And it almost begs to differ when you look at the case from the inside looking out. When you are in the neck of the woods like I have been, because, I will be completely honest with you. I did not go into this with the mindset that Rick Allen was innocent. I have followed this case from day one. And when Rick Allen was arrested, my head was on a swivel. I was like, wait, who is this? Because we were anticipating a group of people being arrested. We were anticipating the revelations that we had that had been described in the media about the crime scene. We were anticipating this to be much bigger than just a lone wolf faction. And so when Rick Allen was arrested, I was ready and willing to look at the case like, okay, who is this guy? What part did he play? Was he involved with Keegan Kline? Was he involved with, because at the time when Rick Allen was arrested, I don't think any of us really understood the dynamics of the sticks and all of the things that had transpired behind the scenes when it came to, the Brad Holders, the Patrick Westfalls, the Elvis Fields, all of the third-party suspects. We knew about Ron Logan, but he had never been up to that point linked to any of the third-party suspects that came after Rick Allen was arrested. So I was willing to be open-minded, like, okay, what did this dude, what was his participation? And it wasn't until, and I know that some people, especially those who think that Rick Allen is innocent, it wasn't until the Franks memo came out where everything was kind of laid out for us page by page. It was like 135 pages of information where I remember I was at work and I had my earbuds in when this document dropped. And it was describing to us for the first time the crime scene. I was in tears. And I work with a guy who has a daughter who plays softball. And he knew about my YouTube channel, and he knew I was following the Delphi case, and he made it a point to let me know my daughter's playing in a softball tournament this upcoming weekend, and we're playing at the Abby and Libby Memorial Park. And when this memo dropped, I went to him and I'm like, you need to hear this. And it was the detail of the crime scene. And it was just so, to hear it for the first time, I was just completely devastated and saddened by what I was hearing and enraged at the information that came out in that document. And here we are with this one individual who has no ties to any of these groups of people, the CSAM material, the Keegan Kleins, the Odinist theory. We have this man who's being charged with this infamous crime that has now taken over the state of Indiana, and it's gone viral and nationwide, and everybody's following it because we have imagery of the suspect, we have a voice of the suspect, we have video, and we still have no answers. I was so upset at work that day. I just couldn't swallow right. And I was still willing to be.
And you were upset. Why? What was the reading, and why were you upset about it?
Well, simply because it is so. It's the story itself is haunting, for lack of a better word.
Mm-hmm.
When you first follow the case, and you've got you can listen to podcasts about the case, and it's when you actually, if you decide to step out of the audio version of the case and you look up the Monon High Bridge, and you're like, holy crap, this thing is massive. This bridge is massive. And you actually start to take a firsthand look at where these girls were. And the idea that out of nowhere, just one man is able to approach them and herd them off the end of the south end of the bridge and down a hill. And the Franks memo just really made things hit home. The horror that these two little girls had to go through. And we still don't know how everything played out. The state has provided a narrative, but the narrative doesn't make sense. The timeline doesn't add up. There are people in the vicinity. There are unknown cell phones within the crime scene. I'm talking 60 to 100 yards distance of the crime scene prior to the girls arriving and while the crime is taking place. And I wanted to believe that this was like, a short scenario of death. And then you read the details of the case and you're going, oh my God, oh my Lord. How does one person inflict these kinds of injuries on Libby? And Abby's just standing over here watching? Doesn't make a sound? Doesn't try to run? And then it's like, okay, Libby's extinguished. So now, Abby, it's your turn. Come here. The details in that Franks memo were so horrific. It was angering, to be honest. And I wanted to find resolution in whoever law enforcement pointed the finger at. But once the finger was pointed and the conversation kept going, I kept going, okay, wait a minute. This does not make any sense. This guy does not fit the imagery. He doesn't fit the category. He doesn't fit the personality. He doesn't have the history. He doesn't have the background. And then once he was charged, I still was thinking, okay, there's going to be something that's going to come out to prove that this man did this. And I would say 2 weeks into trial, I said, they are bullshitting us like we're idiots. This was an arrest to stifle out the bullshit that was going on during the sheriff's election. The fact that Tony Liggett was being told by his challengers We are going to prove how bad this Delphi case was handled. We are going to bring in the big dogs back in where they should be, and we're going to solve this case. And I personally, and this is my own independent opinion, I personally believe that law enforcement in Carroll County is on the take. They were allowing criminals to operate right under their nose. They were allowing the trafficking of meth and other drugs and other problems like the sex trafficking of children. They were allowing it to go on, and we're looking the other way and getting paid off. To when this crime happened, they could not pin it on the real perpetrators. They attempted to let the case go cold. And when it came down to the citizens in this country being outraged about this case, they finally came to the realization that they weren't going to be able to just let it go cold and be an unsolved case. The easiest way to fix the problem was to close the books on it. And that was arresting Rick Allen.
Refresh my memory. 2017, February 13th and 14th. The girls are found on the 14th. Is Tony Liggett the sheriff at that time, or is it Lesenby? I can't remember.
It's oh God. So it was Liggett. I'm sorry. No, it was Tobe Lesenby. Tobe Lesenby was the sheriff. Tobe Lesenby was in charge of the search. He was in charge of, he is the one who contacted the man who owned the drone and had him come out and do a search with the drone, with the heat infrared sensors, who said, I saw searchers, I saw animals, but the girls weren't there. Tobe Lesenby was also the sheriff who called off the dogs and called off the search around 11 o'clock that night. It was, I believe, in 2022, if I remember correctly, I could be wrong on the year, that Tony Liggett was running for sheriff as a Republican, and he had two opponents, and Mike Thomas was one of them. Mike Thomas had been the deputy chief sheriff, and Mike Thomas had felt that the Delphi case had been mishandled. The FBI had been removed, which I really don't even know how that happens, because in a case like this, the FBI is typically involved, which the FBI was involved on the onset. They're the ones who served the search warrant on Ron Logan, and they're the ones who also participated in a lot of the very first interviews of suspects. But Doug Carter seen to it that the FBI was excluded from the case, and he's even on the record stating that he had the FBI turn over all of their reports and records and information they had collected during their involvement in the case. Michael Thomas, who was running for sheriff, emphatically was making it known that he was going to bring the FBI back in. He was going to bring in experts. And
okay. Wow. So he's going to bring the feds back in, and the locals don't like that. This is the classic jurisdiction clash that you see portrayed in movies all the time, right? The locals resent the FBI coming in and taking over because they're going to get all the credit. But in this scenario, you think that there's some dirty deeds that have been swept under the rug, and some dirty details might come out that the locals in Carroll County don't really want to expose. Is that accurate to say?
Pretty much. Yep. And Michael Thomas was demoted from his position, and he was excluded from not just the Delphi case, but a lot of other cases that the Carroll County Department was investigating. And he filed a lawsuit, and there was a large payout, but the details of that lawsuit are under lock and key, and he's not allowed to discuss them.
It's interesting. Now, I told you when we spoke in private, I have talked to 3 or 4 other individuals that, I just stumbled upon this story recently in recent months, and I found some things on the internet, and I thought, gee, be interesting to ask them some questions about this little article that they put out. So I have talked to a few other people, and funny enough, they have basically told me the same story that you just did about this law enforcement individual, Michael Thomas. So very interesting. I maybe he's one of the hidden key figures that people are overlooking in this, because I don't see a whole lot of talk on YouTube about it. But when I had private phone calls with people, they were emphatic about Michael Thomas.
Michael Thomas was true blue when it came to the resolve of this case. And his authority and his involvement was taken away and stripped because he challenged he challenged the department. And the lawsuit that he filed was indicative of somebody who had been wrongfully demoted, privileges taken away, and they wanted him silenced. And the non-disclosure agreement evolving around the lawsuit gave the Carroll County Sheriff's Office exactly that. Michael Thomas was featured. He did actually speak and have an appearance in the Hulu documentary regarding the Delphi case. But when it comes to him speaking with firsthand knowledge on the case, he will not do that because he has to honor the court's order. But to put it in perspective, he was the law enforcement officer who interrogated Ron Logan when the girls were first found.
I'm glad you went here. I was just about to ask you, isn't this the guy who blows through and presses Ron Logan's cousin and gets him to admit it was all a false alibi?
Yes. Yes. Ron Logan reached out to a cousin asking for an alibi, not for the morning of February 13th, where he is driving his truck around town. He drives to the transfer station and dumps several bags of trash. He then returns home. His phone, according to the FBI search warrant, pings out near the north end of the bridge at 2:08. Now, if you believe the state's narrative, Libby supposedly uploads a photograph of the empty Monon High Bridge at 2:05 in 10 seconds. Ron Logan's phone is pinging out there by the bridge at 2:08. He doesn't ask for an alibi for that morning. He asks for an alibi by his cousin through the window of when the girls arrive at the bridge. Then they go missing. And he tries to move up his trip to Lafayette earlier in the day. So he's telling the news media, I wasn't here. I wasn't home when all of this happened. Yes, you were. And you're asking for a family member to give you an alibi before the girls' bodies were even found. He didn't head to Lafayette until after 4:00 in the afternoon. In his receipt that was recovered during the FBI search in his home shows that he paid for the fish that he bought at the aquarium store in Lafayette at approximately 5:21.
Right. Now the state says the girls are dead. It's all over by 2:32, right?
Correct.
Which I myself, I don't know all the ins and outs of the story like you do, Aimee, but I find that very hard to believe given all the information that I've covered and read and reviewed. As I said in the intro questioning, the medical examiner, this Roland Core, he couldn't give an exact time of death. And if he can't, how can the state? I find that hard to believe.
Exactly. And the question is why? Why couldn't he give a definitive? I mean, even within like a 3 hour window, when we know precisely, hand fed by Becky Patty, what the girls ate before they left to go to the trails. That was banana pancakes, their stomach contents. Why was there such a big to do about who transported the bodies from the crime scene on the 14th? Why was Roland Core called in all the way from Terre Haute to handle this investigation? And we still don't have real autopsy reports, a time of death. And we have Roland Core for years telling us that there were at least 2 weapons involved in this murder. But we get to trial, and all of a sudden, he has an egg cracked over his head, and he has a premonition of, oh, I'm standing here at my toolbox, and I realize that maybe it was a box cutter. Well, that's convenient, seeing how in 2017, Robert Ives was sent letters from an inmate by the name of Reese Davis, who was in prison with Ron Logan, claiming that Ron Logan told him that he committed the crimes and he used a box cutter.
Boy, that's interesting. How would he know that? How would he know that in April, May, June, July 2017?
Exactly. How would he know that? And furthermore, I'm not even saying that I buy that, because it's been described 2 different ways. One was a box cutter and another was a carpet cutter. One's a lot more sturdier than the other. But what we do know, based on the search warrant served at Rick Allen's house, is that Rick Allen had a very intense, serious knife collection. And I would like to believe that if he's as savvy as the state wants us to believe, and that he pulled this off, that he wouldn't have taken a flimsy CVS box cutter to the crime when he had access to that genuine, valuable knife collection that he had. You just have to make it make sense.
Let's go back to Ron Logan here. Now, I told you I got real hot and heavy on this case about 3 months ago, and I had just seen little blips and blurbs about this in the years since 2017 when this happened. And, you know, I kind of thought, like all sort of murder mysteries, gee, what a tragedy. Didn't think much about it. I remember seeing the Bridge Guy video on local news reports, and I didn't, you know, I saw it flash across the internet. People talked about it a little bit. It just didn't seem like there was a lot there. Well, I happened to stumble across some YouTube videos with the interviews by local news outlets that are all over YouTube now about this property owner where the girls' bodies are found on February 14th, 2017. This man, Ron Logan. And, you know, I'm watching these YouTube videos and I'm thinking, wow, this guy is extremely odd and suspicious. And I'm reading the comments and it seems like, you know, a 50-50 split. There's a lot of people who have the same sort of impression of Ron Logan that I do. This guy's kind of creepy and weird. And in fact, in one of the interviews, he has a very vague resemblance with the outfit he's wearing, the hat, the coat, the jeans. Very vague. And I say vague to be fair. It's not identical, but boy, at a second's glance, you could easily mistake him being Bridge Guy. And so a lot of people opine this in the comment section on these YouTube videos. And I didn't know the whole story about Ron Logan and all the details. Now, when I dug into it, I came away sort of thinking, God, if this guy this guy has to be involved to some degree or another. And if this guy isn't involved, in my mind, in my emotion after reviewing some of the initial information about him, if he's not involved, nobody's involved. I felt very strongly at the time that, God dang, this is extremely suspicious. The lies, the property, the girls are found on his property. He would know that area better than anybody. And so I kept digging, and I came across the search warrant that FBI agent Nicole Robertson put forth, because she found his the lies with his alibi story to be concerning. The fact that he lied to investigators and concocted the story. And then so I read the search warrant for his house, rather, and I thought, my God, this is damning stuff. They've got the cell phone pinging. They've got, like you said, 208, 209 near the Monon High Bridge, minutes before this supposed or purported abduction takes place. Now, I don't know all the specifics about pings and how accurate it is, if it can put you within 5 feet of where it pings. I don't know all the science. Maybe that's a stretch to say, oh, he's definitely in this spot. I don't know. I could be wrong. But the fact that they have his cell phone pinged around later that night, I think it was 10 o'clock something, in and near the spot where the girls were found. I got to say, kudos to this Nicole Robertson. I don't know if she's around. I don't know if you've spoken with her, or if she's on the interview circuit for this, or if she's, behind the curtain and doesn't want to be approached about it. But this is the only woman. You talked about the FBI being with it and having the manpower, having the resources in the initial days of the investigation. She seemed, from the descriptions I read, she was hot and heavy after Ron Logan. And I think she was on the right track. I think where this sort of got derailed and went wrong is that it took a month. It was like mid-March before they finally got the search warrant cleared to go and search Logan's property. And a month is a lot of time for people to clean things up, so to speak. I said a lot there. What do you think about what I said, Aimee?
So I agree with everything that you've said. On the first initial outlook of your perspective, there's two things I want to point out, that when you take a step back and you look at the case and you look at the Bridge Guy video, there's two things about Ron Logan that don't align with the individual that we see in the Bridge Guy video. One is the mustache, and two is the Bridge Guy is not wearing glasses. And in every video, other than the mugshot, when he was actually arrested, which he wasn't arrested for the Delphi murders, he was arrested for a probation violation of driving without a license. That's the only picture that we have of him without his glasses. And for a man his age to be out there on the bridge, a decrepit bridge that's dilapidated, and you've got missing wood planks and trestles, it makes it very hard to fathom that he would be out there without wearing glasses. And Bridge Guy clearly does not have on glasses. However, my opinion of Ron Logan is that he is the head of the snake in this case. Ron Logan had 40 acres of land. He had lived there for over 50 years. He knew anything and everything about the community. He frequented all of the bars. He had girlfriends who came and went. In fact, next to February, his most recent girlfriend was Ashley. Her name was Ashley Wright, heavy into meth. He had an individual named Garrett Kurtz, who worked as a farmhand for him, who not only used meth, but also sold meth. So to me, he was almost 80 years old. There's no social media to be found on him for us to go back and see, okay, well, who were on his friends list? Who was he communicating with the most? That's not available. All we have to go on is those in the area who are willing to speak. And some of those people that I have spoke with have said Ron Logan knew everybody. There wasn't shit that went down in Delphi that Ron didn't know about. There were a lot of parties and things that went on out there at Ron Logan's property that obviously only the locals would know about. I can't prove them. And that's the biggest problem that I have, especially on the night of February 12th. There was supposed to be a militia gathering at his property. And I have hundreds of people who say it, but I can't prove it. There's no evidence of it whatsoever. No one has presented me with a screenshot of a photograph or details of this event happening, but it's a common theme amongst the locals that on February 12th, there was a party/militia event that was held on or next to Ron Logan's property.
And the 12th would have been Sunday, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I've heard these rumors too that Ron Logan and that had a quote unquote party of sorts, a get together, a pig roast, camp out. I've heard several different categorizations
Yes.
or adjectives for it, and that people at one point got too rowdy. They were near the cemetery. They vandalized the cemetery.
Yes.
They're traipsing back and forth between the cemetery and Ron Logan's house to use the bathroom, and pissed Ron off the next day because they trashed the place and vandalized the cemetery. So I have heard that. Now that adds an interesting twist and opens up a whole can of worms, that people are camping out, scouting the area, enjoying the area. That there's a whole world of possibilities if there's multiple people camping out on the property the weekend before the murders. That is extremely spooky.
It is. And starting clear back on my series of the Delphi Vault, I've searched for, anybody, the names that I've heard who were present. There's not one photograph. There's not one image. There's not one off the cuff comment online, like had the best time last night at Logan's. Nothing. I can find nothing that proves that this event took place. However, I truly believe that the rumors, the social media accounts from back in 2017, that is where the heart of this case is. That's where you're going to find the clearest truth. And there's two scenarios. That on February 13th, when Ron Logan went to the transfer station, he claims he was throwing out Ashley Wright's belongings. They had broken up. He was done. He was throwing her shit away.
She was a live-in girlfriend, correct?
Yes, she had been a live-in girlfriend. She was involved in the meth scene. And, I've been told different things throughout the years, depending on who Ron was dating at the time, what he was involved in. There was no question that Ron was a bar goer in the community. He frequented a lot of bars in that area, and there's different accounts of his behavior: very aggressive, very belligerent, very overpowering when it came to women, knew everybody by name or face. That really is not debatable. So when it's put forth to me, well, can you make a connection between Ron and so-and-so? And I'm like, no, but you can't pretend that he didn't live in the community for almost 50 years and he didn't know everybody, especially with people that were involved in nefarious things. And Ashley Wright was involved with a lot of nefarious things in that area. And he stated that he was throwing her stuff away at the transfer station. And then on the flip side, I've been told, no, that's not what he was doing. He was throwing out the garbage from the party that took place the night before. And I can't argue either one because they both make sense.
Okay. So a weekend breakup before the murders. There's an interesting twist. I was not aware of that little possibility.
Mhm. And I also have photographs from and going back a little bit that you brought up about the FBI agent Nicole Robinson. She seemed to be very on point and very adamant that Ron Logan was the guy. However, years after, when she does a deposition, she has an attorney present. You should read her deposition. She completely retracts a lot of what was in the FBI search warrant that was served on Ron Logan's property. And mind you, there were two, and they were both served in March. The first one was for the violation of the probation, where they went into his property and they collected all of his guns because he was a convicted felon and he was not supposed to have guns. And according to all of the reports, the amount of guns that he had filled up the back of a Carroll County law enforcement van from floor to ceiling, and some guns went in the front seat. That's how many weapons he had. The one thing I want to point out about that search warrant, well, no, sorry, not that search warrant, the secondary search warrant. The secondary search warrant that was served for the Delphi murders, where they went in and they searched his entire home, never once mentioned a Sig Sauer, never once mentioned a .40 caliber bullet that they were looking for. And in fact, and I will send this to you and you can use it on the video when you post this interview. There is a individual who worked for an auction company that who was provided by Ron Logan's son. Ron Logan had a reverse mortgage on that property. And when he went to prison and defaulted on the loan, his property was in the process of being repossessed, foreclosed on. His son was able to convince law enforcement to give back all of Ron Logan's guns. And Ron Logan's son, his name is Ryan Logan. Ryan then took the whole stash of weapons to an auction house. And the person who was in charge of handling the estate of those guns posted on a Delphi Facebook group and stated that he received the weapons from Ron Logan's property. Brian had provided those, and he was trying to sell them in order to save the property from foreclosure. And it was brought to the auctioneer's attention by other employees that, oh my goodness, those guns are owned by Ron Logan. And Ron Logan is a suspect in the Delphi murders. So the auctioneer reached out to law enforcement to inquire about, should I proceed with auctioning off these weapons, or are they part of an investigation? And he stated in his post that law enforcement told him, no, you can auction off the gun collection because we don't believe a gun was used in this crime. And those guns brought in almost $500,000. That's how an extensive gun collection Ron Logan had.
That's a serious collection. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Oh, I thought if you're a felon and you get caught with a weapon, I thought that's serious. That's a serious charge. Probably another felony, I would guess. I don't know. Why were additional charges not filed against him?
Mm-hmm. Well, they revoked his probation. They sent him to prison. He went to Newcastle, where he met Reese Davis. And then lo and behold, Ron Logan is telling Reese Davis, well, when Nick McClelland becomes prosecutor, he's promised me that he's going to get me out of here. Nick McClelland took office on the 1st. By the 16th, Ron Logan's sentence was modified and he was brought home on house arrest.
Right.
Why?
Very interesting. Unbelievable. Well, let me toss in another little X factor here. And I'm not saying that this is certainly connected, but the thought crossed my mind. Let me see what you think about it. Is it not a fact, Aimee, that when they found the bodies of Abby and Libby at the final crime scene, isn't it true that they say Abby was nearly drained of all her blood?
I can't say that I agree with that. The crime scene in itself is very odd, to say the least. You have Libby. Libby appeared to be the target. She was the most brutalized. And again, I'm going to reiterate that I truly believe that the attacker who inflicted the wounds on her was from the front. It's not, I don't know how you, her incision, the cuts on her neck were vertical, meaning top to bottom. And there were 4, possibly 5, because there are 2 that overlap. All of the wounds are on one side of the neck or the other, cutting through both carotid arteries. And there's no defensive wounds. In my opinion, Libby was restrained, whether it be someone holding her arms behind her back, her arms being tied behind her back. But you cannot convince me at all that someone is coming at you with any kind of a blade from the front and gets 1 cut in, let alone 4 to 5, and you don't defend yourself. And it seems completely implausible that someone would approach her from behind and be able to restrain her and inflict those kinds of wounds in the vertical direction that they were inflicted. I mean, if you're behind someone and you're going to cut someone's throat, it's going to be horizontal, not vertical. Multiple cuts on both sides of your throat. That makes no sense. Then you have the idea that you've got her best friend standing there. And she's doing what? Just watching, not screaming, not running. That just makes no sense. And when you look at Cicero's, he is the blood expert that the state put on, who also works for ISP. He wasn't independent by no means, but he even divulged that he felt that Abby was held down. She was in what they call a boxer stance. So in the leaked crime scene photos that have circulated, if you imagine somebody who has their elbows out to the side and their fists clenched, her fists were like pulled back into the sweatshirt that she was wearing that belonged to Libby, that Libby was supposed to have had on at the onset of this trail visit. Her fists are withdrawn into the sweatshirt as if she's cold. And her fists are, I would say, both at like breast level, and her elbows are out. And she had 1 cut to the left side of her neck, and her head's turned to the side. There's no struggle. There's no fight. There's no blood on her hands. Anybody who has a wound inflicted on them at their throat, if their arms are free, their immediate reaction is going to be going to the wound to stop the bleeding. There's none of that when it comes to Abby. Abby is pristine. The amount of blood that is under her, I can't speak to because it was never really calculated or described. All we know is that from every person who sat in the trial depicted the crime scene as having a lack of blood. And
so is it fair to say that there's missing blood? And where is the missing blood?
I would presumably say yes. I know that the hoodie that Aimee had on a sweatshirt that had on a hood, and it was that was saturated. But her hands, her fingernails, I mean, just imagine your hands, being submerged into an onslaught of flowing blood. Your hands are going to be covered. And we don't get that with Aimee. And with Libby, that Cicero, who was the blood expert for the state, describes Libby as being standing upright with these wounds, that these wounds are inflicted, and Libby is upright and she's mobile. Both carotid arteries are cut. And on top of that, there's other inflicted wounds. You're going to have arterial spray, of course, but you're also going to have gravity pulling the blood flow down. Libby's chest and torso is very much clean. There's no indication that she was upright. Then Cicero claimed that she went down into a sitting position and leaned forward. And that was supposed to be why, in the crime scene photos, the blood from her injuries is going upward over her face. That makes no sense to me. There is blood flow from her neck that goes up over her cheeks and her face, as if she was inverted. Like her head had to be below her shoulders, below the wounds on her neck, in order for that blood flow to be where it's at. But he claims it's because she fell into a sitting position, collapsed forward, and the blood flow went up her face. And then she was dragged to the position that she was found in and staged.
Right. So it sounds like you're pretty confident to say that the final resting place where the bodies are found are not necessarily the actual crime scene where the murders take place or the wounds take place, I guess.
I'm going to say for Libby, absolutely not. Not for Libby. For Aimee, possibly. That she was murdered where she was found. And that falls right in, I mean, it is so, like, Ted, all I can say is that when I lay down at night to go to bed, literally every single night, it's what puts me to sleep, envisioning being on the bridge and what could have transpired from there, and how these two girls ended up where they were, with the amount of people, the amount of law enforcement, a drone, firefighters, everybody out there looking for them. And they're so close to the edge of the creek at the same exact, directly across from the south end of the bridge. And there's no way the girls could be there. So the bigger question is, what happened? Where were they taken? I don't believe that Libby was killed. at the crime scene. I believe that Libby was killed somewhere else. Could it be Ron Logan's? Absolutely. But who was involved there? I honestly don't know. Or
let's
could the
go,
crime?
let's go back to Ron Logan just for a second. These videos later on, years later, when he gives statements to, I think there's like a couple of girls that drive up to his property, and he doesn't know he's being recorded, from what I can tell, but they're asking him questions. I find it particularly insidious the way he talks about the girls in the murders. He has a tone, the way he talks about it. He victim blames. He blames them.
Like he's
getting themselves
angry.
killed. Yeah, if they would have waited instead of being stupid, getting themselves killed, none of this bad stuff would have happened to me.
And the other thing I want to point out that he draws reference to in one of those interviews is, he pretends that he doesn't know the girls. However, he makes a complete reference to Libby's father, Derek, being a criminal.
Really?
He points out.
When did he say this?
This was in one of his interviews that he gave, that Libby's dad was involved in all kinds of shady business, criminal business, which falls directly in line with Ron Logan running the bars and having relationships with nefarious people in the county. And I can't really name the sources and the people who have told me these things. And it's been overwhelming that Ron Logan knew who was on his property. If there was something going to go down on his property, he was made aware. And that leaves open the door that not necessarily that Ron Logan himself participated, but he had knowledge of, okay, these girls, they're effing up. They've been lured out here by some shady characters, and And one of the statements that I've been told was that he wanted their bodies placed on the borderline of his property, as far away from his house as possible, which is exactly where they were found. I can't pretend that I know exactly who committed this crime, but there's pieces to the puzzle that fit, and there's pieces to the puzzle that do not fit. And either way you look at it, Ron Logan fits both categories.
Yeah. Well, in my mind, he does fit the profile more so than a Richard Allen. Now, I've seen several of these videos that defend the official story, and they talk about, oh, this person has an arrest record and a criminal history, blah, blah, blah. Well, in the case of Ron Logan, he's a little slippery, because if you read the FBI, the document I referenced earlier, maybe it's the search warrant from Nicole Robertson of the FBI, there is as best as I can remember, there is a string of women who were romantically involved with Ron Logan at one point or another in decades previous, up to the time of the murders. Like you said, you talked about the live-in girlfriend. Several, from what I've read, it is alleged that several say that Ron Logan was abusive to them. And one in particular went on the news media in recent years, I believe, Connie Dillman. And she told the world that Ron Logan picked up a crescent wrench and hit her over the head. And from what I gather, she never called the police and pressed charges. So people out there supporting the official story, condemning Richard Allen, they're playing a little fast and loose with some of these facts. And in the case of Ron Logan, it's slippery because there are all these allegations of his domestic abuse towards women, toward ex-lovers, ex-wives, but there's no formal criminal history from what I can tell. So I thought that was important to bring out.
And that falls into the category of what connections did he have, and why were charges, not brought against him? And parallel to that sort of a situation is the other case that I have been working on for about 4 years involving Garrett Kurtz. Garrett Kurtz was the domestic violent perpetrator against the female that I advocate for, who's in the Indiana Women's Prison. But Garrett Kurtz was the farmhand that worked for Ron Logan for years.
Now,
was very familiar.
Refresh my memory. Is Kurtz a convicted murderer at this point?
Yes.
Twice. Is. Okay.
Twice over. Yes.
Wow.
Garrett Kurtz is who I have been told that the 2019 press conference where they brought out the Young Bridge Guy sketch was because of Garrett Kurtz's arrest. Garrett was arrested on April 1st, and that 2019 presser occurred on April, I believe, 22nd. But throughout all of these different sagas, I look at, again, Garrett Kurtz, who the female that I advocate for is Ashley Garth. And Garrett broke into her home, laid in wait with duct tape, rope, socks, attacked her when she came home, strangled her 3 to 4 times until she was unconscious, and then kept reviving her and then doing it again, ran from the police, and Nick McClellan let him out 10 days later. There was a restraining order filed, and he violated it twice. And each time he was released the same day. And I have spoken to him. I still communicate with him rarely, but I still do communicate with him. And he told me, well, Nick McClellan grew up with my dad. He told me I didn't have to worry about shit.
Wow. Okay.
So
that's my God. That's a very strong statement. He said that to you over text messages?
Over a recorded phone from prison.
Oh, he spoke to you on the phone.
Correct.
Wow.
So when I look at Nick McClellan and his career as a defense attorney and the people that he grew up with that I know for a fact, including his own father was an arson. He was an arsonist. Nick McClellan had a cocaine habit. Nick McClellan owned a party bus that he drove around the county of Carroll. He defended some of the biggest meth dealers in the county for years. And then he became a prosecutor without an election.
And he modified Ron Logan's sentencing in early 2018, right? Yes. I think we established that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, okay, so this this is looking a little ugly so far.
It is very ugly, and they carry the shield well, because I've not been able to penetrate and get to. And trust me, I have been digging and digging and digging. There are so many unanswered questions about connections and reasoning. I'm talking law enforcement in that community who make less than $100,000 a year, and their wife is a stay-at-home wife, but they live in a $500,000 home. Make that make sense. I'm talking about land deals and property ownerships and businesses with backings. And then you look at David McCain and Dan McCain, who were like intently seeking obtaining ownership of Ron Logan's property to add it to the trail system, to add it to the grants that they had acquired to expand the trail system, to make Delphi more of a tourist attraction. There are so many issues in this case that have so many unanswered questions that when you narrow it down to the person that they charged and they convicted, it makes no sense. Somebody doesn't wake up one day and go visit their mother who just had surgery and then decides, oh, let me go buy a 6-pack of beer. Now, mind you, the state wanted to throw out there and cram down our throats that Rick Allen, while in prison and incarcerated, said, I'm an alcoholic twice. I'm sorry, but a grown man who claims to be an alcoholic is not getting drunk off of 6 beers. That doesn't make any sense. And where's his bank records for the purchase of that 6-pack of beer? Where's all the cell tower pings from him leaving his mother's house almost 40 minutes, 50 minutes away, him traveling back into Delphi, and then going home and grabbing a jacket and then heading to the trails?
Right.
Where
I happen to see a clip from the TV show Inside Edition, and it had the guy they call the Mind Hunter. He helped the FBI track down and hunt down these serial killers in decades previous. John E. Douglas, I think is his name. Yeah. And there's a little 2-minute clip, and they ask him, give us your take on the Delphi murders. And he pretty much gave a statement that backs up the root of what you're saying. People don't roll out of bed one day and decide to have a psychotic break and go kill and try to sexually molest girls and leave them dead in the woods. That's not the typical profile for someone who pulls off a crime like this.
And then when no one knows that you were there, you don't go home, and when it hits the news, you don't look at your wife and go, "Oh my God, I was there today." No, you shut your mouth. And then if you're guilty, you've got 5 years and 8 months to gather your shit together and come up with a story. And that story, if you were guilty, wouldn't involve the car that you actually drove if you had an option to say that you drove another car. There are so many things about this case that don't make any sense. And that also includes the state showing us this grainy picture of this compact black car. No video, but they show us a grainy picture of this little black car. And then they want to try to convince us that, well, the Hoosier Harvest Store camera was off by 50 some minutes. And this is the only photograph that we have, regardless of the fact that there were actually 4 cameras on that building. And they're giving us an image from the worst visual standpoint. There's no proof that that grainy black compact car pulled in and parked at the CPS lot. Everything from that point on is a guesstimation. They never show us how that grainy black car left that lot, which direction they went. We do know that there are over 14 business video cameras that were collected from downtown Delphi. And it is implausible to think that if that grainy black car parked at CPS and then pulled out of CPS after 4 p.m. when they claim the muddy, bloody guy was seen walking straight up the road in front of everybody. If it left coming the same direction that it came, why don't we have video of that, or at least a grainy image of the car leaving? And
right. I have not seen any footage of the car of Richard Allen leaving. If they got him coming and he left and it came the same way, why is he not? Why do we not see him on the Hoosier Harvest Store surveillance footage leaving? And why do we not see him as muddy, bloody guy walking down 300 North like Sarah Carbaugh swore to?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, have you seen the video of her interview with the sketch artist who told her, well, we can cheat?
Yes, I have. I saw that
Mm-hmm.
recently. Incredible. I don't know what's going on there with her, but for her, for Rick Allen to allegedly kill the girls at 2:32 and then be walking down just in front of or approaching the Hoosier Harvest Store on this County Road 300 North 90 minutes later, that is again, I've never walked the trails. I'm not familiar with the area. I've just seen the aerial overhead map views. For it to take 90 minutes for him to be dawdling around 90 minutes later on 300 North when the state
Mm-hmm.
says, oh, the white van showed up at 2:30 and spooked him. None of this makes sense. And there is
And we know,
the state
we know
has
the
no
white
evidence.
van. We know the white van didn't show up until 2:44.
Right.
It's
right.
on camera at
Much later.
2:44.
Yes.
So that whole storyline goes out the window. And the state's star witness, Betsy Blair, who was out there doing her loops that she describes, she's the one who helped derive the young bridge guy sketch of the young man who was on the first platform at roughly 1:57, 1:58. She turns around, walks away from the bridge, and she claims that she passes Abby and Libby. She doesn't describe any man following them. And if you believe Dr. Walla's story, that Richard Allen told her, even after she threw her handwritten notes away, and this was the first time in I don't know how many months that he wasn't on video camera being recorded, but at this convenient moment, he tells her that he laid in wait, saw the girls enter the trails, and followed them. Well, from Mears Lot to the Monon High Bridge is a 6.5 minute walk. And Betsy Blair turns around from the Monon High Bridge after seeing the man on the first platform, the young bridge guy, turns around, starts to head back, passes Abby and Libby, never describes the man following them. Who's on the first platform?
Right. And now Betsy, would you say Betsy is the best witness that the state has?
Put it like this. Betsy Blair was the witness who created the very first sketch in this case, which was the young bridge guy sketch. Betsy Blair is the witness that they relied on for the young bridge guy sketch that put in motion the 2019 press conference of law enforcement taking a new direction, presenting that sketch. So she was
just to be clear,
thoroughly credible to do that.
Bridge guy is not young guy sketch either. These are two separate individuals. Do I have that correct?
So the first bridge guy sketch that was released was not the first sketch that was created.
Right. And Betsy Blair gives them the young guy sketch, and they sit on that. They don't release it for two.
They sit on it for 2 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Betsy Blair says, why in the hell are you sitting on my sketch? I gave you a sketch like a couple days after the bodies are found. And they went with the bridge guy sketch, who has the newsboy cap and the goatee. That's the one they put out there. And remind me, how did they come up with that one? Is that Sarah Carbaugh inspired? What
they say Sarah Carbaugh. Yes.
But it's also from the video footage too, right?
Well, it depends on how you look at it, because Daniel Pearson, who was out on the bridge pretty much immediately after the girls were abducted off of the bridge, that's a whole different third-party suspect avenue. But Daniel Pearson went in and also helped create a sketch. I think there's a huge conspiracy as to who actually contributed to the original sketch that was released, the old, what we call the old Bridge Guy sketch. Law enforcement, by the time we got to trial, attributed it to Sarah Carball as being, the vision behind that sketch. But we do know that Daniel Pearson went into law enforcement the evening of the 14th, and I believe also on the 15th, to help create that rendition. So the old Bridge Guy sketch came out first, but then it was in 2019 where law enforcement retracted that sketch and presented the young Bridge Guy sketch and said, the first sketch is now secondary. The young Bridge Guy sketch is who we believe abducted and murdered the girls. That sketch on its own came from Betsy Blair. So when I say that she is a star witness, I would consider her, they relied on her up to that point. They wanted everything that Betsy Blair had to say up to that point until she passed Abby and Libby and continued on her walk. It was her description of when she left the trails, because they showed us another grainy image from the Hoosier Harvest Store camera that they claimed was Betsy Blair's vehicle leaving the trail at 2:18, passing the camera, that when she got down the road and was passing the CPS building, she didn't see Rick Allen's car there. She described a white, sharp-edged, cornered vehicle that reminded her of her father's, I think it was a 1965 Comet. The state at trial didn't want that information to come in. So, of course, because she was a state witness, they didn't ask those questions. So the defense could not open that door because it wasn't on. It hadn't already been introduced. So the state didn't ask her those questions. And Judge Gall, even though the defense said, hey, we have questions outside the scope here that she wasn't asked, that involves information that she provided in her interviews and her deposition. Instead of Judge Gall being unbiased, Judge Gall says, well, if you want to ask those questions, you're going to have to bring her back in and keep her under subpoena. So that's what they did. Betsy Blair was excused from the stand, and she was recalled during the defense's case to get on the stand and tell the other half of her story, which makes it less effective in front of a jury.
Well, just for the record here, I haven't stated it explicitly, but people could probably pick up on it so far. But let me just put it out there for the record. I am very doubtful that Richard Allen is the right guy in this case. And I know people are going to squawk in the comments section, but Ted, he's been convicted by a jury of 12 peers. He's the guy who did it. Period. End of story. They have confessions. They have the magic bullet that matches his pistol. They have.
Let me interject and explain really quick to the listeners why the bullet is dubbed the magic bullet. That is because we were told for years that the Bridge Guy video, and I furiously asked for the viewers to look up the Bridge Guy video and watch it repeatedly. Put your earbuds in and watch it. We were told emphatically that you hear the racking of a gun, and that's when the bullet was ejected, unfired, at the south end of the bridge. And we call it the magic bullet because no one has ever explained to us how the unspent round was racked, kicked out from the gun, ejected onto the ground, how it then made its way down the hill, across the private drive, down the secondary hill, across the creek, into the crime scene. That's why we call it the magic bullet.
Right, which is hearkening back to the Warren Commission and the investigation in the murder, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. There's also a magic bullet in that story. Like I said, I don't believe Richard Allen is the right guy. I believe he's been railroaded, and this, I could let sort of everything else lie and not worry about it, but the fact that, in my opinion, we have an innocent man being railroaded into prison and tortured and had his life ruined, had his wife's life ruined, the daughter's life ruined, this doesn't sit well with me. And this is sort of my motivation to find out even more. I told you, I believe on the first episode, that this is extremely spooky and scary and concerning that someone could get swept up in this investigation and have a murder pinned on them. And I'll say this too. Here's another caveat from me. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I'm a spectator. I'm looking at information and I'm trying to analyze it to the best of my ability. I'm not perfect. I do make mistakes. That being said, I do not think Richard Allen is the right guy. The evidence, as far as I've seen it and what they introduced at the trial, the evidence to me is not compelling. I have reasonable doubts that this is the guy. You brought up the magic bullet. The story is from the state that bridge guy flashes a weapon, racks the slide, a bullet ejects. Then this bullet is found in between the two girls, a fifth of a mile away across the creek on a corner of Ron Logan's property. Well, the bullet can't be at two places at once, obviously. So,
you can't even fathom a man who, first time perpetrator, no record of any kind of criminal history at this level, is capable of pulling that off and telling the girls, hang on, wait a minute, let me locate my bullet, and then we'll proceed. And keeping both girls in check as he coerces them out in the woods in broad daylight. And when I say out in the woods, if you visit my channel, I have numerous videos from on scene, from what the terrain looks like and how wide open it is. And it's vast, but the sound travels, and this was not a one person job. It just wasn't. And just remember this, as listening to this, and if you're somebody who thinks that, the badge always comes with honor and value and valor, it doesn't take lies, destruction of evidence, hiding evidence, and unethical maneuvers to convict a guilty person. And you have all of those elements in this case. Give it to me straight. Show me the evidence. Give me emphatical proof that Rick Allen is the man. But everything that the state has done in this case screams loudly, we're trying to make this story fit this individual who conveniently, honorably came forward and said, hey, I was there that day between maybe this hour and that hour. And if you're not involved in a crime such as this, and you're unaware of the details, you're not going to be, he would be looked upon just as badly if he says, well, I arrived at 12:26 and I left at 1:15. Somebody who had his whole entire day mapped out point by point by point by point, he would be looked at just as, harshly as he is being looked at by just simply saying, I was there. But the one thing that he didn't have to do was admit that he was there, because I can tell you that every single person that was called to the stand in his trial, not one of them looked the jury in the eye and said, that is the man that I saw on the trails. He was never identified by any witness as, yes, that's the man that I saw. In fact, every single witness had a different description, a different build, a different height, and a different description of clothing. Yet, here we are.
Yeah. Why didn't Nick McClellan, when Sarah Carbaugh's on the stand, why didn't he say, is the muddy, bloody guy that you saw walking down 300 North, is he in the courtroom here today? He didn't ask that question.
Who was less than 3 feet away from your driver's side window?
Right. Slam dunk question.
Period. Never asked. And to think the most sickening, there's 2 sickening aspects of this case. The first one being that who actually committed this crime is still out there. And these 2 little girls have been literally auctioned off for self-preservation by law enforcement. That's the first most sickening thing about this case. The second is an innocent man being put through not only just a trial and a conviction, but absolutely gutted of all humanity, and his sanity being destroyed, which that is telling enough. I mean, a normal human being couldn't survive what he was thrown into, and he is 100% proof of that. He mentally couldn't survive. He's not a pathological deviant. He was a normal human being who literally, this experience made him lose his mind. And those 2 things right there make this case so prolific that the questions that we have need to be answered. And I'll be the first one to say, if it is proven that Rick Allen actually did this, I will be shocked, but I will be the first one to be humble and say, I got it freaking wrong. There are reasons why I got it wrong. Let's just be honest. Let's just be truthful. Let's practice law. Let's put an investigation out there that actually is credible. And these questions wouldn't exist. Nick McClellan and his regime of law enforcement officers who run in a posse, who play musical chairs with their positions, their income, their roles, all feel like they are well above the law. They don't have to explain themselves because we said this is what happened. We should just swallow it and move on. Well, if they haven't realized yet, that's not going to happen. And come September 21st, I will be front row for the oral arguments in this case.
That time is rapidly approaching here. I tell you what, we are over 90 minutes here. I still want to keep this sort of short and not too intimidating for first-time listeners. So that's a good note to wrap on. There's plenty more details to go. I have several more questions, and let's get to them in episode 3. This will be a wrap on episode 2 here. So Aimee, thanks for being with me today, and we will next time around hit episode 3 here and get that on record.